Welcome to Musicians versus the World, the podcast where we explore aspects of music and musician life that may not have been covered in music school. I am your host, Christine Smith, and today is part one of a two-part series with our guest, musician and composer Alexander Parsons. In part one, we're discussing his score to the upcoming film Flight 149, Hostage of War, the extraordinary story of passengers and crew who become unwitting hostages during Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. We also discussed the impact of music teachers on their students and how his own teacher influenced his life. He is passionate about the intersection of music and technology, and the fusion of classical training, DJ culture, and software-based sound design has become a hallmark of his work. Beyond film and TV, Alexander performs both as a touring musician and a session player. He is a founding member of the Miro Shot Collective, pioneering multisensory live shows that blend VR, mixed reality, and live orchestration at venues like the Institute of Modern Art in Amsterdam, BAFTA Piccadilly, Somerset House, and South by Southwest. He is currently leading a collective of artists, musicians, and filmmakers called The Room Is Not Silent, whose upcoming installation is entitled From the Fields. And I'm so excited to talk with him today about all of these fantastic projects. So Alexander, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to Musicians versus the World.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Christine. It's really lovely to be here, and that's a lovely introduction as well. So, yeah, thanks very much for that.
Thank you. I can't wait to hear about all of these wonderful projects. And I love the idea of mixing technology and music and the fusion of that, plus all these other art forms and mediums. I can't wait to hear all about these fantastic projects you're working on. But first, I would love to hear a little bit more about you and your background. Has music always been a big part of your life, or did you come into it a little bit later?
No, I started very, very early. It's interesting. I didn't have musical parents. I think about this quite a lot, actually. Where did it come from? But both of my parents, who were both teachers, they just loved music, and I think they were really keen for me to start quite young. So I actually started playing the violin when I was 4 years
Oh,
old.
wow.
So very, very early. But it was kind of an unusual way to start. I didn't have individual lessons
Oh,
entirely. We had group lessons, and there were sort of kids of all ages. So I was 4, and you had kids and players all the way up to the age of 18 who would come really early in the morning. So they would get there at about 8 a.m. And as it got later and later, they'd be joined by the younger players. And as you got older, you'd get there earlier and earlier and earlier. And
oh.
eventually, by the time you're a little bit older, you would be one of the first, and you'd be joined by the younger musicians. And I think it was that really inspired me the most. I think just the idea of being in the same room as people who are more accomplished than you, and being able to listen and play with them and learn with them, I think is such a great way to learn. So yeah, really, really early, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, it's lovely.
So is this like once a week or a couple times a week that you would go?
That would be so I did have a lesson, during the week. So that'd be after
Okay.
school. And sort of my parents would sort of drive me on to their violin lesson, and we'd have the regular lesson, but then every Saturday morning for 18, well, I guess from the age of 4 up to 18, I was there in
My
the morning.
goodness.
Yeah.
So by the time you were 18, what did your weekend look like? You said you got there early and then you were joined by the younger ones. What does that day look like for a music student?
Yeah, yeah, busy. I kind of think back and think, well, how did I keep that up for so long? But I think part of it is having just such an amazing teacher. He's sadly not with us anymore, but
Mm.
he was such a wonderful man, and quite a quite a fierce, but passionate, um, teacher, and really kind of knew how to really understood. I think I I speak to my mum about it now. Is when you're learning, and it's hard to kind of understand that connection between student and teacher, and
Mm.
what it really means, and what it really means to be a teacher, and what it means to be a student. But talking with my mum about it, she said, well, he really understood you as both a musician and a human. He kind of
Mm.
understood how. I mean, I was not a regular. I wasn't necessarily, I wasn't one of the naughty ones, but I was distracted. I would always be fiddling around on my violin and not necessarily focusing. And he got that, and he encouraged that. So going back to your question, my day was very much led by this wonderful man, Andreas Nicolau, who would get there at 8 a.m. And play them more. I'm talking about sort of slightly. So when I'd reached the sort of
Right.
later ages, I'd
Mm.
arrive at 8 a.m. and I'd play the more complex quartets, and it would be all from memory as well. It'd be very, very little use of music, a lot of listening, a lot of we'd have to memorize everything.
Mm.
And then as the day went on, we'd be joined by the younger musicians, and we played different pieces. And by the end of it, we'd be playing open strings, really simple. And
Oh,
it would be very similar every weekend. And there, up to 40 people in a really small, tiny little living room.
wow.
But yeah, brilliant, lovely memories.
That it does sound like a lovely memory. What do you think the value of you just playing those open strings at the end of the day, what did that do for you as a musician as you got older?
Um, I think actually it's really about because playing open strings is, you'd think it's very, very simple, but actually
Right.
if you're playing with other musicians as well, there's something about communication that's very
Right.
much a part of, I think, performing with other people as well. It's a conversation. So if you're playing, you might be playing the simplest things, but if you're playing in a way that stands out or hinders other musicians in some way, then certainly that's something that you should maybe address. And so I think there's
Yeah.
a lot of value in, I think, just helping musicians to listen. So simple parts really can be very complex.
Hmm. Did you realize that when you were 18, or is that something you've realized as you were later, as
No,
you've grown?
not at all. Not at all. It's funny. I think, at the time, it was quite fun, and the lessons were fun. They were serious but fun. So
Mm.
we were probably a little bored at times, but bored in the nicest way. We were all really good friends, and
Mhm.
you'd hear the little players scratching away, and we'd be there, going, "Oh, here we go." But also knowing that you're sort of nurturing at the same
Yeah.
time, and we'd all have a concert as well. You would put on these big concerts, and
Mm.
sometimes we played at the big venues in London, the Royal Festival Hall, and the really prestigious, famous festivals. But he would always have a concert at the end of every year or a couple of year, and there was definitely a big Christmas concert. And some of us played solos, some of us
Mm.
we all play the scratchy bits together, and it was very sweet. And it feels like a family, and I'm still in touch with many of them now.
That is a mark of a truly masterful teacher, that he was not only able to develop your musicality, but you as a person, as a leader, as a communicator, a collaborator. Just, I can see why you just love him so much.
Yeah, yeah, I do. Actually, it's really lovely to be able to talk about him. It's something that I don't do very often. I think we would talk about him. If I bump into some of my friends, we would sort of mention him, but it's not someone that not something that comes up in conversations very, very often. I feel myself getting a bit emotional. God,
Oh,
yeah, but no,
I'm sorry.
it's very lovely. Really, he was a lovely man.
Yes, that's wonderful. And I love it that he fostered and he encouraged that creativity, even though you felt like you were just, playing around. And but
Yes.
is that creativity and maybe just playing around, is that what made you interested in composing and turning to a life of creating?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I don't think it made me want to pursue composing, but I think the
Mm.
idea of sort of fiddling around and working things out was certainly very much a part of it. I've always been kind of, one to find melodies. I'd love to kind of, I'd always plucking my violin in those lessons and be told off for it. But that then progressed into school, and I was then told off for doing the same thing. But actually, looking back, it it was me sort of finding melodies and finding harmonies and just exploring what you can do with melody without rules, I guess. And that I think as a composer, it can be quite a complex one, because as you're learning and going through the education system, you're taught to compose music in a very specific way. And
Right.
I think back, and it's incredibly important to have an understanding of those traditional techniques and the rules. If you're going to break them, then it's really good to be able to know as much as you can about them. And I think,
Yes.
I was learning at the time, in the violin lessons at school, and at the same time, by sort of fiddling around, I was exploring other ways, but I guess I didn't really think about what I was doing. It was actually just, playing with friends. I was in a band, and, we would just improvise, I guess. But
Mm.
without really knowing what we were doing. There wasn't a word to it. It was just friends playing music together.
But then at school, you would learn, the very traditional style of composing so that you knew those rules. And
Yeah.
then they were always kind of in the back of your mind as you are doing things, even if you're not consciously like thinking about it as you're performing. You're not like, okay, I'm going to do 2-5-1 now, that sort of
Yeah, no,
thing.
absolutely. Absolutely. No, I completely agree. It's sort of there that, I mean, sometimes you very specifically think about them, but I
Yeah.
think more often than not, even now, it's what you've learned. It's that sort of combination of knowledge over the years that shapes
Hmm.
where your fingers go, and or kind of the harmonies you like to hear, and the music you like as well. That shapes it too. Whatever whatever you're listening to. If you listen to a very specific thing, or you're drawn to it, and no matter what the
Hmm.
style of music is, you're, I guess, drawn towards that. It's
Yes.
I guess, a taste. Taste comes into it there in some ways.
Right. Yes. Well, that actually leads me to, excuse me, that leads me to a question I had about, you scored a documentary lately, which is coming out soon. You said Flight 149, Hostage of War, and that had Middle Eastern techniques, which is completely different than that Western style. I mean, like it's just they use completely different scales. I don't even think they call it scales, and like different time signatures. Did you study that? How did you get into that different language of music for that project?
Yeah, it was a really sort of fascinating challenge. But
Yes.
this was also, it was, I think what was brilliant about this particular score is I had the brilliant opportunity to work with a really good friend of mine called Ollie Howe, and we
Mhm.
composed the score together. A lot of it was in the same room, which was fantastic. So we both had to face this challenge together. And
Mhm.
I think, for me, I'm not obviously not a Middle Eastern composer, and I know I'll be the first to admit I knew very little about Middle Eastern music. But
Yeah.
I think the beauty of composing is actually you get to explore different different sounds. And I think my biggest I guess you would partly call it research for this, but I mean,
Uh-huh.
when I was in, I think it's really listening. Um,
Mm.
so I listened just to so much music, and actually, I think one of the things that I kept coming back to, I was really fortunate. While I was at university, I was part of the orchestra, and we were actually taken over to Kuwait City to perform. I
Mhm.
think it was the first Western orchestra to perform in Kuwait City, and
Wow.
it was, we were performing Western music there to people who hadn't really heard it before,
Mm.
and that was quite fascinating. But for us, we'd never been immersed in that culture before. It was very, and as a 20, I guess I was a 22-year-old violinist, and I got really into electronic music at the time too.
Yeah.
Going over somewhere like that and just being immersed in a culture that's so different was just mind-blowing, really. And
Mhm.
I remember being in the hotel that we were staying at, and this music was playing over the sound system. And funnily enough, it was a song that I knew really well. That was, yeah, it's a song I'd heard in the clubs in London, to be honest.
Mm. Mhm.
But it was played by Middle Eastern instruments, and it was the most bizarre. I was like, what? And bizarre thing. I was like, what is this? I had friends here. We were all like, this is mad. How are we hearing this piece of music in this setting? So we
Uh,
actually kind of left the hotel. We had a bit of free time, and we started walking around the markets, and we started singing this to almost every stall that we could find who were selling cassettes. And after 5 or 6 people just laughing at us, one person said, "I think I know what it is." And they sort of pulled out this cassette, which I've still got somewhere. And sure enough, it was that. And I don't know, there was something that really drew me to the sound of Middle Eastern music then. And I since got into it really, really deeply and started listening to a lot of it. And even though I didn't learn it, there's some of the tropes you pick up, some of the harmonies, some of the choices that
Mhm.
musically you make. They have a sort of Middle Eastern sense. And I
Mm.
think that was a very long story behind this, I guess.
I
But
loved that story. It was a
but
fantastic story. No, no.
in a sense, that's exactly what Jenny, the director of the film, was after. This is a film,
Okay.
by the way, about a group of hostages who were aboard a British Airways flight in the 90s. And the
Mm.
moment it lands, the 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 country, or Kuwait, is invaded by Saddam Hussein's army, and all 400 hostages and the crew are, well, sorry, not hostages, passengers, were taken hostage, and the film then plays out the situation. And Jenny said, "Well, I wonder what it would be like if we found a score that was somehow explaining what it feels like to be inside the heads of the hostages." And so in my mind, I kind of
Oh.
felt that, what if we were Westerners, which all the hostages were mostly Westerners.
Mhm.
What if we sort of hinted at Middle Eastern music? So it's as if a Westerner was attempting to recreate this kind of world, but it feels Western. So it's still kind of, we used Western instruments. I used my violin.
Mm.
We used a lot of electronic instruments as well. But there were these hints of Middle Eastern motifs and ornamentation that crept
Mhm.
in. And, I played those on my viola d'amore, which is a sort of almost like a very, very low viola. And
Mm.
by processing it, you're getting these kind of unusual hints of sound, but it's still, it feels familiar. It still feels Western to us.
Gotcha.
So that
So
was, yeah.
using the score, you were able to kind of have that sort of fish out of water sort of feel to it by using the instruments, but then also having this other, I guess, musical language come in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
I guess the closest we came to, I guess, traditional Middle Eastern was working with a vocalist called Tamar Shorki. And we, for a while, Jenny was really keen to have vocals in the score. And
Mhm.
for a while, we were thinking, well, how could we use a vocalist? And we came up with an idea that we would ask her to sing the titles of some of the cues that we'd composed in Arabic. And she
Okay.
then kind of explained to us, well, what kind of Arabic? Would it be Kuwaiti Arabic, or would it be Iraqi Arabic? And so that
Mm.
was really fascinating to us. We didn't know, this is something we learned. And I mean, as it happened, we ended up using Kuwaiti. I think just it suited the sound a little bit more. It was
Okay.
a choice thing.
Mhm.
But it was really brilliant to learn that. And then she performed these wonderful, wonderful sort of improvisations, which we then twisted up and threw through FX pedals and sort of twisted it. So it still had this kind of human quality to it, but
Mhm.
at the same time, it felt like it was otherworldly, and like, I guess, like you're inside the heads of the hostages. That was our
Mhm.
that was our aim.
Gotcha, gotcha. Was there anything what was, like, the most difficult part of creating that score? It sounds like a blast. It sounds like it was just, like, this, like, huge amount of creativity and research and learning new things and create yeah, it just sounds fantastic, but there must have been some sort of challenges to it.
Yeah, I think there really were actually. I think it's overall it's a very dark film.
Mm,
The hostages are taken from, well, it's several different places and kept in very sort of dark conditions, and it's very unpleasant. And the story in general is very kind of quite challenging, and some very
mhm.
personal, sort of very affecting stories are being told. And
Right.
so naturally, that leads towards quite dark music. And
Mhm.
but then there were several moments in the film where we really needed to feel some emotion. I think what we really struggled to nail here was, or it took a really long time at least, was, what how do we feel emotion, but without, hamming it, without making it far too emotional.
Yes, yes.
And we did choose to use strings. We had a really small string trio. I played the violin, and we had two, cello and viola as well.
Mhm.
And when we first played some of the parts, we played with lots of vibrato, and sort of thought, "Wow, we need it to be quite emotional here." And
Mm,
it just, yeah, it didn't work at all. It just felt like it was removed. And so I think, for us, it was really exploring how to tame that. So I ended up saying, well, look, let's play with no vibrato at all,
right.
really sort of stark. And so
Yes, yeah.
it would feel quite cold, but in the score against those pictures with such dark music surrounding it, this kind of emotion emerged without feeling too romantic. So
Right, right.
yeah, I find it really fascinating where, playing styles and, how using instruments in just very subtly different ways can create this, you know, quite amazing emotion.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and especially because you knew your instrument so well and you just know what it can do, it gave you the freedom to do like, for example, I am not a violinist, and so I probably wouldn't know all of the different things that you could do, but if you put me on a piano, then that would be a completely different story because that's the language that I speak. So
Yeah, it's great. I wish I was a brilliant pianist. And sadly, that's something that escaped me. I did learn for years, but I always just found it very hard, and
yeah.
I still do. It's couple of fingers, and that's
Well,
about it.
I tried learning the violin and yeah, that was difficult for me. So I have so much respect for violinists because it's amazing the beautiful music you can make on that
Well,
instrument. And
the
apparently
feeling is very mutual then. I respect you for your piano skills.
Thank you, thank you. Well, beyond that, I also respect you for the electronic music and all of the things that you've been doing with that. You learned electronic manipulation in college, is that right? What's the story? How did you get involved in that?
Yeah, so I guess the first time I was, I guess, exposed in a way to electronic music would have been when I was around sort of 16, 17, just before university. And
Mhm.
it was really strange, I was at a festival, and as it happened, I think the Red Hot Chili Peppers were playing on the main stage, and it was so busy that I ended up in another tent, and it was Laurent Garnier playing this awesome French techno. He had live sax. I was like, oh wow, you can have techno with a saxophone and live percussion. This is great. I love it. And I guess knowing that, I then kind of grew like everything I do. I just become obsessed massively with it, and so I then became really obsessed with that world. The world of
Mhm.
techno and electronic dance music. And so when I kind of reached university, I I'd learned a little bit of how, software worked. We didn't have the same software that exists
Mhm.
now and the same access to it. I was trying to make techno in Sibelius, which is not something that I would
That's
advise.
impressive that you could do that.
Well, you come up. And it's
Oh.
but it was an experiment. But then when I got to university, I kind of realized that, all those rules that I was taught, and it's brilliant actually. All those rules that I learned when I was at school, they said, look, you know them, that's great. Off you go. And there was no help. And well, there was a lot of help, but the help was sort of very, very specifically structured around me finding my own way, which I think
Oh, okay.
very much suited my style of learning and exploring. It's a university called Goldsmiths, and they're brilliant at that, or very much were in the years that I was there to me. But so at the time, I'm very interested in electronic music, and I was studying composition there by the time I'd kind of reached my final year. And they introduced me to this software called Max MSP, which it's still around now, and it's essentially it's a piece of software that will allow you to build whatever you want. And it could be from, a plugin that will help you manipulate sound. It could be an instrument that will help you kind of build a synthesizer. It could be something like a trigger. So, for example, I was really fascinated by the idea of, being in a place, and where you are in the place would affect how the sound changes.
Mm.
And so I played around a lot with that, creating these what are called patches. And so each time you kind of you move past a sensor. It could be a light sensor or a movement sensor, and that movement
Like you
would
physically moving, am I right?
yes,
Like
yeah,
you are in a room and you are physically moving around the room. Okay.
yeah, absolutely. So they would give me we had a set amount of time that we had to spend in this big studio, which had a surround 8-channel surround system and all the equipment that we needed, which was at the time, I think it's quite basic equipment compared to now. But they had all the equipment that was needed to facilitate these interesting ideas that you had, and some of them really didn't work, and you'd spend hours working on something and think, oh, actually the result isn't great. But I think what was kind of fascinating about it is that process, really, and finding your way. It's something that I've always, we've spoken about it earlier, but it's just the idea of exploring things, and that opportunity to explore mistakes that sometimes lead to these wonderful things. I remember, I had this really dodgy laptop that I was working on, and I would always take it into the studio. They had much better computers, but I loved my kind of really old, cheap laptop, which was all I could afford at the time. I had a really old bit of software on there called Acid Pro, which, I'd do the 3 or 4 things, and then it would start to glitch, and
Yeah, I
wasn't.
actually think I remember Acid Pro.
Do you?
I think
Wow.
I do. I think I had a really terrible copy of that when I was when I was in college. So, anyway, sorry, continue on. That was just, like, bringing back these memories. I'm like, "Wait, I think that's what I used." But yeah, go ahead.
Sharing the Acid Pro love. I think no one's
Right.
pretty clear about it now, but I thought it was great. I really loved it. I think one of the fun things about it was, it isn't like now, when if your computer's working far too hard and you run out of RAM in something like Logic or Pro Tools, you just get a bonk and then it
Yeah.
stops. But then it didn't. It would just start to glitch and do these kind of weird sounds, and it was really annoying. Excuse me. But at the same time, I was like, oh, that's actually quite cool. So I kind
Oh,
of
you liked the glitch sounds.
yeah, I ended up leaning into it. I was like, well, I'm going to have to just go with this. And
All
so
right.
I connect my computer to, I think it was a mini disc recorder at the time, and recorded these glitches, and then found a way to record it back into Acid Pro. It's like, wow, look at this.
Please tell me you still have a copy of that recording. I would I would love to hear that.
I probably do somewhere. Yeah, I know that I do. It's weird and experimental, but I don't know if it's good, but it's the thing, and it's a process that
Yeah.
I loved. Yeah. Yeah, I kind of it's a shame. I think now I'd probably get very angry and throw my laptop across the room, but then it was great.
Yeah. Yeah. But then it was like, oh, this is really neat. Let me see what happens if I do this and then run it back through.
Yeah, exactly. It's great. I think when you're at university, you have the time to explore these things, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. But now, I mean, the technology has grown so much. And I was learning about this. You have even VR that you've got. You're still doing these immersive experiences. Like, tell me some more about these new projects that you're working on, these collectives.